Welcome to the Stumbling Spirit, contemplations on the path of resilience. Whether you realize it or not, you are resilient. It's your birthright. As you take in your next breath, know this truth. It's not only about your capacity to overcome difficult situations, but it's about your courage to do the necessary work to heal, learn, grow, and move forward. What you gain is invaluable wisdom. And it's through these hard stumbles in life that we often discover a new purpose that aligns with our spirit. My name is Fabio da Silva Fernandez, Reiki Master, Mindfulness Coach, and Mystical Explorer. Join me weekly as the Stumbling Spirit podcast highlights the lives of extraordinary people like you, sharing transformative stories and beneficial practices of resilience to guide you on your wellness journey. Darryl Tracy is an accomplished physiotherapist with his own private practice of 23 years. His focus is rehabilitating patients with neurological injuries and disorders such as stroke, spinal cord damage, multiple sclerosis, and Parkinson's. Not only does Darryl help others improve their mobility, but he has an intimate understanding of the range of possibilities in bodily movement as an award-winning professional dancer and choreographer. He also teaches anatomy to aspiring dance instructors at Canada's National Ballet School in Toronto. Today we discuss Darryl's incredible career and we explore the resilience of the human body. It's a pleasure to welcome Darryl Tracy to the show. Hi, Darryl.
Hello.
I just want to ask a couple of foundational questions. What is physiotherapy?
Physiotherapy looks at a broad range of injuries. When we think of physiotherapy, we think of looking at pathological musculoskeletal injuries. So often being able to assess, evaluate, and treat a movement dysfunction or a painful dysfunction. So I think when we think of physiotherapy, we think of it in that realm. But actual fact, it has to do with just how someone is mobile and functional and physical in their environment and in their world. And sometimes things kind of eliminate or minimize that kind of process. So that could be anything from a neurological dysfunction to a musculoskeletal or orthopedic dysfunction to a disease process. It could have to do with, say the lungs. So you may have pneumonia and you can't breathe well, so you're not mobilizing. So physiotherapists do work with the whole body and trying to maximize efficiency in movement potential. It really spans quite a broad client base, I guess. And then, looking at things from pediatrics to geriatrics as well.
I often get confused between physiotherapy and occupational therapy. Can you just explain the distinction between the two?
Yeah, I think, physiotherapy looks at the human body specifically and in movement potentiation or movement possibilities. Occupational therapy then takes that a little bit in a more functional scope and looks at how an individual can then put that into their life and into their body. So how would they would use it at home, or how they would use it at their work or their occupation. So I guess occupational therapy would be more kind of functionally cognizant of that, but there is a lot of overlap because physiotherapists do also look at ergonomics and we do home assessments. So there is a lot of teamwork with physiotherapy and occupational therapy.
Can you describe what you do in terms of the approach that you take from a physiotherapy perspective?
Yeah, I've worked as a physiotherapist almost 35 years now. And I early on started dancing and having a kind of parallel career as a dance artist. And so, in my physiotherapy practice and working with clients with neurological dysfunction, I was starting to become more interested in how I could help my clients move with wellness and trying to balance the basic nuts and bolts of it all, but also how do they move with efficiency, with expressivity, qualitatively. So I guess my practice has evolved over the years where I would work with an individual within their pathological movement dysfunction and then get to know them and then know how to best collaborate with them to attain their physical goals. So my practice has to do a lot with sensory motor retraining for that individual.
I'm just curious about an example. If I were to come to you, let's say I had Parkinson's, how would you approach me in that scenario?
I think on our initial meeting, I would want to get to know you and your life and what your goals were, and then also assess you physically and assess your sensory motor function to see how you were interacting with your environment and functioning. And then trying to, within your goal attainment, try to find ways to augment your movement practices so that you could best attain those goals. So that might look at like something like, if you came to me and you said, I'm having issues around doing stairs, or I'm nervous walking in the community, I'm fine at home. So then I would kind of look at what are the issues that are creating barriers for you, and then how can I give you movement practices that are going to support you in the best way you can. So sometimes that may look like doing some exercises or sort of some sensory retraining. It may look at kind of mobility aids or eliminating mobility aids. Sometimes I involve family members or other healthcare practitioners to support the individual. So it really has to do, it's like trying to solve a bit of a puzzle, a physical puzzle or a sensory motor puzzle to find out what's going to best help you attain those goals.
When patients first meet you, what is their general psychological and emotional state, and how does that change over time?
I guess that really depends on the kind of injury or presentation with my clients. If I have someone who's coming to me with ankle instability compared to maybe someone who's just had a diagnosis of MS or multiple sclerosis. So the range or the spectrum of what I'm seeing is quite broad. And so that really depends on so many factors of the individual, of how this injury is impacting their world, how it is making them anxious about their future, how they are functioning with the injury. So very often they do come to me with some state of concern, of anxiety around betterment. And it is a little bit about trying to help them focus their energy in on what they're trying to attain. But the psychological aspect is definitely a huge component to any sort of an injury. And I would never want to minimize an ankle injury or a wrist injury so that I would never say to my client, oh, that's nothing, don't worry about it. But just support them in that process and make sure that they feel they're getting the tools to rehabilitate.
How do you navigate that as a therapist? So, if someone is dealing with those challenges, let's say there's a sense of hopelessness, let's say there's a sense of lack of motivation, how do you approach that?
I think that's really individual with each person and how they are dealing with their injury and then how they deal with life. And those are sometimes a little hard to measure at a first interaction. And so trying to get to know them a little bit, to listen, to not put upon them my belief system of what they should be going through or what they should be feeling. Because, who is it to say to me that you should just keep going or don't worry about it, or I feel if I do this, I feel like I do it this way. So I just try to listen and support them. And if there is a family involvement or partners or other caregivers, making sure that the team is all working together for kind of finding a little bit more harmony in their trajectory of their rehabilitation. And, sometimes I do work with clients that have a disease process where they may not be getting better. They're actually deteriorating, and we're helping them to, as best as they can, dehabilitate or kind of elegantly and within their scope of focus, deteriorate, but make sure that they stay functional. And that can be really tricky because, very often when you go to a physiotherapist, you're hoping to get better. But for some clients, that's not in the cards.
Yeah, I can imagine that that would be challenging. So, how do you navigate that in terms of encouraging them to return for treatment?
Partnering with them, collaborating with them, making sure we stay focused on a certain goal. So I don't try to go so big picture, but I see help them like, let's kind of break things down into something very specific or a few specific things so that we can find some steps towards where they need to go, as opposed to try and like heal everything in one exercise or one experience, so that they can find some positive direction for what they're doing, even if it is dealing with compensations with the body or dealing with losing sensation or getting weaker. So, what can they do to empower to hang on to their body the best that they can so that they feel like their body is existing and functioning within their best ability?
You mentioned earlier that it depends on the kind of injury. I'm assuming that there is a difference between dealing with a physical injury and, say, an autoimmune disorder. So, how does your approach change between those two situations?
I think I still always look at the whole body regardless of an injury. I try as much as I can to not compartmentalize, say, this is an orthopedic injury, or this is an autoimmune, or this is a spinal cord injury, so that I'm cautious that I'm not only seeing them through certain lenses, or I don't put blinders on, but I really try to look at them as holistically as possible, because all the systems of the body, the physiological systems of the human body, really work together as best as they can to create homeostasis. And so when there is any pathology, that gets disrupted. And so hormones will change, nutrition will change, physical function will change, emotional states will change, from a wrist sprain to a spinal cord injury. So within the kind of presentation, I still try and look at them through that holistic lens, but then start to channel as I get to know them what it is we are trying to target. Even with an orthopedic injury, the nervous system is still trying to work as best as it can. So even though the nervous system isn't dysfunctional, it's being disrupted in its homeostasis drive. So I still will work with the nervous system with a muscle or a bone injury.
What is homeostasis?
Homeostasis is the human being's general drive for balance so that the human body can function in its environment as calmly and as easily as possible. So the body really does naturally and automatically want a homeostatic or a homeostasis, a sense of homeostasis. It doesn't want the temperature too high or too low. It doesn't want any kind of state of inflammation. It doesn't want a lot of change. It wants to know what's going on so it can function as efficiently as possible. So when we have an injury, or when we have jet lag, or when we have emotional upset, that homeostasis gets disrupted, and then the body gets into a little bit of a state of chaos. And so I think all practitioners in life that work with the human body are always trying to help the human body to the best state of homeostasis that it can be. So whether you're a massage therapist or a psychoanalyst or a physiotherapist or an acupuncturist, I think all of those practitioners are aiming to help the body back to a state of homeostasis.
So I might use terminology here that you don't typically use, but it's just the only way that I can think about it. What is the mindset of your most successful patients?
I think the mindset for most of them, and again, I guess I would ask to maybe wonder what success means. I wonder how we measure what is success. And so, if I could ask you to help me answer that question, to define that.
Well, that's the reason why I prefaced it with that statement, right? Because I think often in our society, we define success as having achieved certain benchmarks, of achieving certain goals. And I would imagine that just showing up to a rehab session, rehab treatment is success enough. But I think what I mean is, in terms of being able to move the needle past the current state, which might not be ideal for an individual, what do you find are success factors in the mindset of people that do have injury to achieve a better state of wellness?
Yeah, I think that that's a really strong question. In the world of medicine and, standard medicine, and, even like with the word wellness, it's very often about healing, getting better, learning how to walk again, getting function back. But the human body doesn't always work that way. And so I guess for me, trying to help, depending on the injury, someone to find success or to thrive or celebrate the achievement of a goal, even if that goal means that they didn't cross a barrier into this place that society feels is called healing. So if I have a client, say, who has had a spinal cord injury and they can't use their legs again, and they come to me and they want to learn to walk, and that's not maybe in the cards. Maybe they get to a point where they can stand at their kitchen sink and wash the dishes, but they spend most of their time in a wheelchair. How do I and how do myself and the client redefine success and redefine betterment so that we're not kind of always going, well, I didn't walk or I didn't get better. But in actual fact, they achieved a sense of a new lifestyle that is pretty admirable. Because I've had some clients who've had pretty catastrophic injuries, and then they go off and they live these really incredibly rich and fulfilling lives because they've gone through this sense of catastrophe. And so for me, when I observe them get to that other side, they've found a tremendous amount of success because they've been really, really challenged. So, did they get walking again or did they regain full function? Maybe not, but maybe they went off and had a really full life of being a person in a wheelchair. So, I guess my concern about defining mindset and success is really also a journey. It's not a game where there's a beginning, middle, and end, and that it's an ongoing discovery. And that ongoing discovery has a lot of bumps to it. But I think that supporting them during that journey and so that they can realize, I accomplished this, and that's amazing. And even though it may not be the benchmark that science or the world puts upon us, but that it's their own victory, so to speak. And again, that works very much in the case of people who are palliative or people who are dealing with a deteriorating condition. How do they acquire a sense of wellness and self-worth, even though their body is not on their side? And so, how do you find those goals so they can feel that sense of success? Because I'm not going to not stop them from dying, or I may not be able to stop them from deteriorating, but can I make it a better journey so that it's an ongoing mini successes along the way? So I guess that's how I view it, depending on the individual, and they're trying to find that journey within that process.
I think that's a really good point, right? Because it's not always an upward trajectory in terms of the healing process. There are going to be pitfalls along the way. And also, what we might perceive mentally or think mentally might be different from what the body is able to actually sustain and do. I also got the sense when you were talking that there's an element of adaptation from where they were before the injury and where they could potentially be now and in the future. Like when you mentioned that example of, just being able to stand at the sink and wash dishes, right? And that might just be what they're able to do. And that's the adaptation of having experienced an injury. Do you have any further thoughts on that?
Yeah, and again, I think it's how we measure and how we analyze those things or how we view those things. Because even the word adaptation, I can adapt to something in a very positive way so that I modify my expectations or I still kind of see the success in that, or I succumb to it. And I feel like I don't ever want my clients to feel like, well, I could never get that, but I'm now here. But that's a sense of like I'm modifying my view of the journey a little bit. So it's a tricky thing, but I would never want it to be defined because life really isn't like that. Because there's so many things that infiltrate and affect life that defining an adaptation or defining success is really, really tricky, I think.
It is tricky. And I can imagine just even in hearing your answers to these questions that it would be very difficult to navigate these kinds of conversations with patients because they're going into it with these ideas, preconceptions, be it because of society or how they lived their lives previously, of success, benchmarks, adaptation, all of these different things. So, how do you reframe the language with your patients in terms of encouraging them or establishing certain milestones or wish lists or whatever? How do you approach that?
I think sometimes just helping them break things down into shorter goals or to trying to look at the immediate future or the here and now. Being hopeful to one day be healed or to be hopeful to one day walk or to be hopeful to one day do that sport that they always wanted to do or play that instrument that they never could do. And so, how to kind of look at, well, what are the stepping stones to get there? And also being very honest with them about the benchmarks. Because, we want to be hopeful and we want to move forward, but we also want to be careful of deluding someone because of the way they present that, well, I'll totally cure this disease process or I'm totally going to make you better. We have to be very careful in that. And, clients do want to hear words like, this will make you better. This is going to get you there. And how to, like you say, reframe the language so you don't become a negative Nancy and just kind of go, well, they're never going to get there, but also not kind of saying, well, if we just try harder, we'll get there. And then that can become a barrier because they think I'm doing everything everyone's telling me, but I'm not getting there. And so then they start to reflect on themselves, thinking, why am I not attaining these places? So it's always about the conversations and it's always about the reevaluations and it's always about their expectations of where they want to go, as long as you're being as honest as possible. And I think they also know that you're trying within all of your parameters. Because I've said to clients before, I've done everything in my power, within my skill set to help you. I might not be that person. So helping them find maybe a different team member or different journey to go on that might be helpful for them.
How does compassion come into play in the work that you do?
Yeah, I think compassion is really important. We work, or physiotherapists work, and all practitioners work with so many different people. And within a day, I might have five, six, eight clients. And so, I have been able to try to be compassionate, to be able to listen, to be a partner with them in the rehabilitative goal means. But I do have to make sure that I also save some of my own energies so that I can continue on. Because it can get pretty heavy throughout the day and it can be taxing on you as an individual when things are going rough or things aren't happening the way you, as your team, you and your client were hoping that they would go. And so that can get really kind of like an overweighted blanket on your body. And so, how do you have that balance? Again, we're back at the word balance of how do I be compassionate and supportive and still kind of maintain a sense of my own self so that I can help other clients, but I also can have my own sense of wellness as well. Because if I'm not in my best state, I'm not going to help people either.
That's a great point. I wanted to get your thoughts on obstacles, common obstacles that patients encounter from being able to, for lack of a better term, do the work related to rehab to reach a better state of mobility. What are your thoughts on that?
There are many, many factors in life for all of us that impact on our overall wellness, whether you have an injury or you don't. Those kinds of factors can come from your age, and not that age is ever necessarily a barrier, but if you've had limited life experiences versus if you've had a lot of life experiences, they both can have an impact, both positively and negatively, or just different on your body. Financial means, when you need to be seeing therapists or physios or massage people, that can get expensive when you're trying to kind of supplement your health and wellness if you don't have the means to access those things. I have clients who would love to be able to go to a gym to do their exercises, but they may not be able to afford a gym membership, or they don't live in a situation where that is conducive to that. Family and friend support are, like your own network of who you have. Some people have access to really supportive members of their family or their kind of world, and some people don't have as much of that. So there's, the environment affects it, our experiences, our emotional states, our past experiences. If you've had negative experiences in the past with your body or your training, it can very much impact the trajectory and the potential for how you rehabilitate. So there's just so many factors that feed into that. And that's, the role of, say, the healthcare practitioner with the client, to peel away at some of those, to kind of get to the nuts and bolts of what that person can do. And that's where, my dance practice has really helped. But I think that requires a creative lens. Because, if just to say to someone, well, if you could go to the gym 3 times a week, and if you could do stretches an hour a day, and if you could do breathing work every half an hour, but if they have a full-time job, 3 kids, and not a lot of money, that's not going to happen. So then how do you peel away within their world to support them to find some of those answers for them? Because, we can think pie in the sky of this is what could work, but if it doesn't work in their world, we're not going to get to the place we want to get to. And rehabilitation can be like a full-time job. Like when you do all of your exercises that the physio gave you, and you do the stretches the massage therapist gave you, and you do your mindful meditation that your other practice, like it can be actually a full-time job. And so what do we expect of our clients also within their lives? They need to have a life as well. So I think all of those factors can feed into some of the barriers of rehabilitation, but they're very different for each individual, and they change. Perceived barriers can sometimes actually be solutions. Again, like sometimes, like I had a client once years and years ago. She had her injury when she was delivering her child, and we all thought she is going to have no time to do her therapy. But the team found a way to include the baby in her therapeutic practices. And so again, it really is about using creative thinking with that individual so that you can turn that around and make it work for them, as opposed to going, oh, she's not going to achieve those skills. She's too busy. And so I think looking at that through a creative lens is paramount.
I do like that idea of curating a plan based on someone's life. And I think it would benefit the physiotherapist as well to create the best case scenario for their patients to, I was going to say succeed, to be able to do these exercises, right?
But I mean, again, like I've had a client right now, he's just too busy to do some of his practices. And so we've talked a bit about it because I know he's frustrated and I'm not helping him because we're not actually doing the work we need to do. And so then I tried to say, well, what if we put this on the back burner for a little while, and then we look at it at a time when you're a bit more available and it's not an immediate issue. And so we found a period of time later on in the year when things are opening up for him. And then maybe we can kind of then go at this so that he feels that he's also doing it, that he just doesn't keep coming back to see me going, well, I haven't done my exercises and I'm just too busy and that wheel's just not turning. So just again, looking at the expectations and then being that creative guide to find the solutions. Because sometimes you actually need to do the work in order to do that. So if they don't have the means, that can just be very frustrating and really unsettling for them if they just can't get to do what they need to do.
Can you share stories with us in a general sense? I know that you can't share personal client information, but can you share some of your most cherished physiotherapy experiences related to your clients in terms of them being able to overcome the injury that they faced?
I've had so many incredible experiences with individuals over the 30 plus years of in rehabilitation. I guess to give some examples, I mean, when you see an individual go through quite a catastrophic injury, and with whatever it is in their means, you see them get to another place, whether that is within their own hope system. And for them to arrive at that, for me, is such an incredible thing to witness within the individuals. And, some of my clients have been such an inspiration for their own tenacity. Yeah, so I do have many clients who have achieved various kinds of wellness within their practices, but within the neurological population, many of the injuries that I deal with are really long term. They're not like I sprained my ankle, 8 weeks later, they're back at their sport and I don't see them again. Some of my clients I've worked with for 8, 10, 12 years on and off throughout their rehab process. Because, with something like, say, MS, where someone may be walking and then I work with them for a while, and then maybe if they've deteriorated, then all of a sudden they use a mobility aid. And then a few years later, maybe they're now changing to go into a wheelchair. So I end up seeing them through different stages of their rehab process, or I go back to working with them. And so my experiences of being able to see people for a long time has been an incredible experience, just watching someone contend or deal with their injuries and their overall wellness, whether they are going in kind of a direction of rehabilitation or dehabilitation, but how do they kind of coast and achieve those things as they go along. I can't really give specific examples, but I think that that's basically where I see a lot of for me, the excitement of what I do.
What inspired you to be a caregiver?
When I was really young, I mean, I always wanted to be a dancer. I loved physical expression. I was never really particularly driven to physical sports, but I loved dancing. But in the time when I was really young, people who were born male, didn't do a lot of dancing where I grew up. And my father was a administrator of a nursing home. And so he used to take me to work when I wasn't at school and just let me be with the residents. And very often I'd take them for walks or I would read to them, play games. I might have been like 10 or 11. But I knew at that point that I could use my interest in physicality and then direct it into more wellness. And so that's when I started to consider a career in more of a physical sense. And so that's what led me or took me towards physiotherapy. And physiotherapy and dance has a lot of commonalities because it is about movement, it's about expression, it's about quality. That's how I ended up getting into that kind of world.
Why is dancing important to you?
I don't really know. I mean, when I was really small, my mother has pictures of me dancing when I was just able to stand on my feet. So I think that that was just, I don't know whether it was genetic or whether it was just part of who I am, but I just loved moving in an expressive way. And so dancing has just been part of my fabric as long as I've ever known and still is a big part of my existence. And dancing can mean a lot of things to different people. It doesn't necessarily mean being on a stage and everyone watching you. Dancing can be being on your own, can be moving in a sensorially positive way that gives you a sense of pleasure. And so dancing has always been that for me.
So it sounds like dancing came first and then physiotherapy came after. Is that fair to say?
Well, I mean, I never studied dance until after I became a physiotherapist. I always loved dancing, but never really studied it. I kind of danced around in my bedroom or danced around whenever there's music on. But it was tricky as a young male to get into dancing because it wasn't at that time considered a something a boy did or someone that was identifying as male. That's when I kind of redirected my path and then moved to Toronto and took up dance recreationally, but then very quickly got drawn into a more serious focus in dance.
What can you share about your dance career?
Well, I mean, I've been dancing almost 20 years, and I've had the opportunity to work with choreographers that I've wanted to work with. And dance has such a huge impact on my life because being able to explore, even as someone who went into dance late, considered late, I've had so many wonderful experiences through my career as a dance artist in performing, in sharing with through my teaching, through choreographing, through the creative lens. Because it, like physiotherapy and like all professions, dance has a lot of different pockets of places that you can kind of direct your energy towards. And I've had the real amazing experiences in all of those areas. So it's been a fantastic journey. And now being 56 years old, how do I redefine what dance is in a body that doesn't quite do the things it used to do? But that's an interesting part of the puzzle. And like we're talking about that through, some of my clients, I think all human beings are always kind of evaluating and redefining who it is and where we are at that time within the body that we have. And so, like, is this still enjoyable to me? Is this still something that gives me pleasure? Is this still something I want to do? Or is it just something that's hard for me to do? And I still love teaching. I still love choreographing. And if you give me a chance, I'd still love to be on stage. So, yeah.
I really want to explore that connection between dancing and physiotherapy a little bit more. So, how have you found your experience with dance as a choreographer, as a dancer? How have you found that experience beneficial to your physiotherapy career?
I think that that's really given me, specifically through the qualitative eye, a lot of practices in standard medicine really kind of tend to focus on a more quantitative approach. How many times can you go up and down the stairs? How far can you walk? Can you get up out of bed? Can you sit down well? Can you lift your arms over your head or whatever? So, like quantity, I can lift my knapsack up onto my back and put it back down. So, they're more kind of the nuts and bolts of movement. But dance has given me ability to look at also movement through a qualitative lens. So it's not in the how much, but in the actual how I do it and how I kind of find that. And that's given me a skill set to be able to be creative with my clients so that if they do have a movement impairment, I can find ways of using evocative language or movement strategies that don't look like maybe standard exercises. They look like a movement experience of putting my arm through that backpack strap as opposed to like just do 10 of these and then that will work. But actual fact, I need to snake my arms. So let's do a snake exercise as opposed to what might look like a standard shoulder exercise. And so I tend to bring a lot of dance or expressive and qualitative movement experiences into my practice as a physiotherapist.
Have you ever had a personal injury that you had to deal with? And has this experience of physiotherapy and dancing helped you?
I've had numerous. I mean, I don't think I could not name a body part that wasn't injured through my dance career. I did have one really bad hamstring injury in one leg that really affected my whole left leg. And that would have been like almost 16 years ago. And it still affects me now because I didn't really take the time at that time, even though, I'm a physiotherapist and I know better, I needed to keep dancing at that time. So I danced through an injury that I shouldn't have been dancing through, and then kind of realized some of the compensations, and those compensations have sat with me for a long time. So I kind of then was able to look at being inside of an injury through a different angle because I knew all of the things that I should be doing that I did not necessarily do, even though I knew rested for a certain amount of time, do these certain kind of exercises, get the swelling down. I kept going. And then I then suffered the wrath of not doing those initial stages and then had to over the years kind of dissect some of the compensations that are tricky to do because I learned to kind of dance without the stability in my left side. So it did give me a lot of kind of experiences from a point of view of understanding what it's like to be on the inside of that, as opposed to just on like these are the things you should do, but people sometimes just can't. And so I think that was a really great kind of lesson, I guess, or experience for me as a practitioner who works with people and also with my students, my dance students, that, there is idealistic and then there's, sometimes the real world. And so then how do you marry those concepts? Because we can't just expect someone to just not function for those 8 weeks. I had to keep dancing. So yeah, it was a really great lesson for me as a practitioner, as a dance teacher.
And I'd imagine that having gone through that experience, that it must have helped you in terms of just expressing certain ideas or at least relating with your clients.
Yeah. I mean, I think I would have been, and I was, the world's worst client because I really didn't do any of the things that one should have done. Some of my clients and some of my students do all the work and they do the kind of necessary steps, but I was just a bit chaotic in my expectations and a bit too rapid with how fast I went back. And so that was a good realization on my part.
I'm glad you brought that up because I find that just even with me, I'm in the wellness space. And so sometimes I find that I am a little bit imbalanced where I am caring for other people. And then I'm realizing, okay, well, you're dropping the ball with some things in your life. You need to bring things into balance. And so that's something that's very new for me in the sense that I've only had my business now for almost 3 years. So thank you for saying that because it's a really good reminder.
Yeah, and I think that, with my clients and my students, like, we are all human beings and we all tick in different ways. And just kind of knowing that and not kind of thinking like all of the world functions at this high place, but you don't. And so if you could just get to our state, it's not really like that. We all vibrate at different frequencies. So that really affects how we deal with the world. And I think just as long as we know that, and that helps us partner each other and support each other, even in those times when the work isn't getting done or the experiences aren't happening, but just to know that it is challenging for all of us.
You mentioned you've been a physiotherapist for 35 years. You've had your private practice for more than 2 decades, and you've also been a dancer for 20 years. What have you learned about the human body?
I've learned a lot about the human body, and I think I have a lot more to learn, and I get excited about learning more. I think where I'm at right now is being able to comprehend the holistic nature of the need of looking at the human body through that holistic lens, that I can, again, like I said earlier, separate the nervous system from the system of breath and the respiratory system. I can't separate psychological wellness from physical function, and that they're always in this state of communication. And so that kind of sensory motor symbiotic function is something that I would like to learn more about. And I've arrived at the place where at least I know that, where I'd like to learn more about the human body in that way so that I can best support my clients and I can best support the practices that I use in dance. So I think I've learned that that is necessary, but I'm still trying to strive to find and discover more about that. Like last year, I read the book Breath by James Nestor. And then I really, for the longest time, in physio and in dance, you hear people say, just breathe and make sure you're breathing and relax and breathe. And I was like, what is that? What does that mean? And then, when I read this book, I was like, there is stuff to all of this, but I think we're approaching it in a really reductive way when you just say to someone, we just gotta learn to breathe. What does that mean? So then how do you embody that? How is it working in your body or how is it not? And how does it impact on your function? And how does it impact on your voice? And all of those incredibly important things. And so by doing that constant quest of like finding that, it's taking me off on a bit of a new journey. And again, like, I've been trained, like I understand the respiratory system. I know breathing exercises, but just always peeling more layers away and taking it to another level so that it can have some sort of a more deepened impact on my belief system and on my work so that I can better support my clients and myself. I know I need to learn more.
Well, I want to dive a little bit deeper on that because While you say that you need to learn more, and I think everyone needs to learn more about everything, you've been in this business for a very long time. And so I would imagine that there have been certain things that have integrated into your practice as a result of the wealth of your experience. So, do you have any reflections on that?
Yeah, I think sometimes as you get deeper into a work, sometimes you don't know some of the things you're doing because it has now become more automatic and your body's now in a place where it can then just do those things. So when I do work with more novice physiotherapists or when I work with more novice dancers, it does get harder for me as a teacher to break something down to the most fundamental level because it's not that I've surpassed it, but I don't actually really know that I'm doing it or not doing it. And so sometimes some students will say, well, why are your feet doing that? I'm like, I don't know why my feet are doing like, and then I look at it, I'm like, oh, well, actually it's doing that because of this, this, and this. But I've gotten to the place where some of that just has become automatic in nature. And so that's important to be cognizant of, especially if you are in a teaching role of how you then break down some of those really fundamental principles, because that's not going to come second nature to someone. And so you don't want to just bypass that because they're just not going to maybe discover it. So then sometimes I now don't choose to say teach at a beginner level because I don't think I'd be a very good teacher in that nature in physio or in dance.
Is there anything about the profession of physiotherapy that you would like to change or improve?
Physiotherapy is guided by a college, so we have a licensing board that dictates and supports us, but very much supports the clients that we treat so that they make sure they're getting evidence-based practice. I would love to see the research in physiotherapy start to go also towards a place of practice-based evidence, meaning finding things that have worked in the world for a very long time and dissecting that. And so, why did people move in a certain way? And why in Eastern cultures did when people who go into deep knee bends or squat all the time, why do they have less hip and knee issues? Because from little kids, they went into really deep and hip and knee bends. We know why, but kind of like supporting that so that can support alternative movement practices that are somatic practices that are out there that could be really useful as physiotherapists, but are still considered alternative. So I would love to see us embrace that a bit more because physiotherapy can be pretty didactic and pretty a bit about just what is currently existing in the literature right now, which we need to do, but also kind of opening that up and then researching that so that it can open up the kind of potential for physiotherapists.
I'm just curious also, do you have any thoughts about physiotherapists maybe requiring or whether it would be beneficial if they had the background of dance in the work that they do? Do you find that what you offer is a little bit more enhanced as opposed to someone that would not have the dancing background?
I think that if I was involved in the school systems and university systems that taught physiotherapists, I think it's important that physiotherapists have some sort of experience in movement, whether it's through sports, whether it's through dance, whether it's through exercise, whether it's through Tai Chi, that they have looked at movement sophistication and movement wellness. And they've had the experience of movement education and movement experience of like how they move their own bodies so that when they work with their clients, they can also, it's not about saying, I've been there, done that, but it helps the creative lens then look and evaluate and treat movement dysfunction. So I don't think it necessarily needs to be dance, but some sort of a movement practice, whatever that might be. And I think that movement practice should be above and beyond just going for a walk every once in a while, although that's not bad. But just, I think all human beings could be more driven to movement experiences within their capabilities.
What would you like to share to people out there who currently have an injury or dealing with an autoimmune disorder about physiotherapy and how physiotherapy might benefit them?
if there is like a physical or a sensory motor or a movement ergonomic element to their injury, that seeking out physiotherapists that specialize in that area and finding, the right practitioner for them could then augment their healing process. I don't always think that physiotherapists are necessarily always the right answer. Sometimes clients will come to me and I'll say, I think you need to go see someone who works primarily in acupuncture, or I'd like for you to go and work with a kinesiologist, or I'd like for you to go and work with an occupational therapist. Also, knowing that being aware of the spectrum of practitioners that are out there, and physiotherapists being one of them, and people that are in the standard medical model, but then also all of the other kinds of practitioners out there, becoming more aware so that they find the best solution for their healing process. And that's going to be very unique for all of them. So I think that I would just say to anyone who's dealing with any of those kinds of injuries is letting yourself do some of the research so that you can find those best solutions. That's really tricky because we now rely on Google or on social media, like Google rates things. That may not be the best answer. So, how do you become more aware of what is out there is really important.
What is the potential, though, for the benefits that physiotherapy might offer?
Well, physiotherapists could provide an assessment or an evaluation of the injury. And then if it's for physical function or sensory motor function, help that person kind of achieve the goals they need to do within their goal attainment. So there's a lot of potential benefits of physiotherapy. And then sometimes, they're, like I said, that may not be the person that they need. So I'd hate to kind of say everyone should go see a physiotherapist, but there is a lot of benefit from physiotherapy intervention.
I'm curious to find out what your definition of resilience is.
To be resilient or to bounce back or to rebound or to redefine something, again, I think has a lot of different volumes to it. Some people, when you think of resilience, when you think of rebounding back, we think of those kind of, again, success stories. Someone was in a big car accident, paralyzed, and now they can walk again. Amazing. But we all have little mini things throughout our days, throughout our lives that kind of can just throw off our day or affect our day. And so I think that we all have little things that challenge our lives. And so then being resilient when you don't have a lot of money in the bank and you can't pay your bills, or being resilient when, you woke up on the wrong side of the bed and you're feeling off. And so how do we deal with those little mini challenges as opposed to always thinking them as being those gargantuan injuries? Because I think we all are a little resilient in all days. So again, kind of like the success, when I think about resilience, I just think we all kind of cope and deal with the world in unique ways. And some of us have better resilient strategies in certain parts of our lives and less so in other parts of our lives. Again, I wouldn't want to define like that person's very resilient or that person really isn't resilient. Some of my clients, when they come to me for physiotherapy care, may not have had physical practices in their lives. So it's harder for them to bring in a very novel way, physical experiences or exercises if they didn't exercise before. So that may look like they lack resilience, but it's like they don't. They may just lack the skill set to do that. They may be very resilient in other aspects of their lives. So I think that being able to kind of define what someone is being resilient in or what it is we're kind of evaluating is important. But I define that ability to kind of rebound or redefine or reimagine what it is we're doing. Like I gave the example of me now being a 56-year-old dancer. How do I, as Darryl Tracy, be resilient or be reimaginative and not succumbing to, but just how do I reimagine my body doing this right now, as opposed to going, well, when I was 20, it was like this. And when I was 30, oh, I could do this. And now I can't. How do I reimagine it so that it can be as pleasurable and purposeful as possible for me right now? And that's going to change in 10 years, in 5 years, in 2 years. I might change this afternoon.
Can you elaborate a little bit more on the resilience of the human body?
Yeah, I mean, sometimes I've seen incredibly catastrophic injuries that I've been so amazed at where the body can actually survive that. And I'm talking about, like really catastrophic physical, emotional injuries. And you just think, how is a person going to get on the other side of this? And when you see it happen, you're thinking that body has incredible potential. But then, sometimes you see the body just not step up to the plate in certain situations. You just think, why can't our bodies be more resilient or more careful? And so that's the beauty of life, is that kind of extreme nature of it is keeps life very present, because it is not definitive. It's not everyone who gets cancer survives. It doesn't happen that way. Everyone that has a car accident survives. It doesn't happen that way. We don't know what's going to be at our plate. And so I think that, kind of knowing that keeps the human body, or tries to thrust the human body into the present state as opposed to the past and then always the future. But that it's, this nature, we don't really ever know what next 5 minutes could bring. And so, and then how our bodies are going to deal with that. So for me, that's really incredible. And that keeps everything a bit more creative and alive. Because if I knew what my body was going to be like in 10 years, I could just ride that treadmill until I get there, but I can't. I don't know. And so I think that some of that really is dependent on knowing that about the human body, and that we can go from really amazing things, but then even like things, some things can just completely destroy us and we don't know why. And it could be just the simplest things of like my flowers behind the computer are all wilting, and that might just crush my day and leave me really sad. So I love those kinds of extremes that life throws at us, those curveballs that keep us really present and challenges our resilient natures. And then again, that the body wants to find that balance. So I just love this constant dialogue that we have with our own bodies, with the environment, with the world, that we're all trying to embrace a little bit. And, it's a bit chaotic right now. So how do we all just, how do our hearts just stay beating for this moment is pretty impressive to me.
What are your personal practices of resilience?
I do like downtime. I do like a lot of alone time. Both of my careers have me around human beings a lot. And so I do love solitude. I really love to be on my own. That does rejuvenate me. Some people say, why do you want to just spend the evening on your own? I'm like, you have no idea how much that kind of recharges me. So, I think sometimes people define recharging by socializing, by being with people, by going out, by doing things. And for me, just to kind of sit in my space and to be alone for a little while is such an incredible recharging moment for me. So I find that works for me. I have started to notice that, because I have two careers, that, I'm a very driven person in a way that I do tend to bring a lot of busyness to my world. So then trying to dissect, how do I find little moments where I can reboot? And so again, like I haven't really found those answers. I'm still tending to do some things that do keep me too busy. And I like that inherently, but I don't think my body is going to be able to sustain that. And so searching for that kind of better equation for what that could look like, the enjoyment of this sense of catastrophe, but then being able to kind of live underneath the storm to support myself. So it's a journey.
And so, how do those moments of solitude and reboot help you?
I think it just gives me a sense of peace, and it gives me a sense of calm. Let everything just slow down for a moment. Sometimes I have to be thinking a bit ahead of myself with teaching or writing a grant, or, where am I going next with this project? Where am I flying to teach? Where does this client need to go? So I tend to be on this kind of constant hamster wheel that needs to be going faster than I need to be. So it just lets me just slow that down a tiny bit so that everything can be a bit clearer, so I can use my senses in a bit more clear state so that it doesn't feel as chaotic as it could possibly feel.
How can people reach you if they want to contact you?
I do work at Alpha Health Services. That's the name of the clinic where I work. And that's located at Bridgepoint Hospital. It's kind of enclosed it's a private clinic within a hospital. But yeah, they could contact the clinic.
Okay, great. Well, thank you so much for your time, Darryl. It was such a pleasure to have you on the show, and thank you for sharing your insights and wisdom. Thank you for listening to The Stumbling Spirit, Contemplations on the Path of Resilience. This is Fabio da Silva Fernandez. Join me again next week for another episode of transformative stories and beneficial practices to guide you on your wellness journey. If you wish, you can follow and DM me on Instagram at The Stumbling Spirit. Until next time, take a deep breath and another step forward on your path of resilience.